Welcome everyone to this webinar dedicated to a short overview of cybercrime threats to UAE organizations and essentially how knowing this information can help you stay ahead of the game. So Susan has presented me, but again, welcome. My name is Irina Nestorovsky. I'm the Chief Research Officer at Kela. We are a cybercrime threat intelligence company, and we'll get to know what it means in a few seconds. So why are we talking about this at all? Cybercrime threats, threat intelligence. Organizations in UAE are facing multiple cybersecurity threats, some opportunistic, some targeted. The classic user-oriented threats persist, while others, due to geopolitical trends and world cybercrime threat trends, threaten entire organizations, companies, and governments. We will talk today about cybersecurity threats that stem from cybercrime underground, where to find them, and how to use them to protect your organization. Everything you see or saw here on the slide is different statistics, different events that happened involving UAE and the Middle East, and definitely there are big statistics existing about cyber attacks against UAE citizens, organizations. So this is definitely something to be aware of. What is cybercrime? And most of you, I think, are experts in cyber threat intelligence or anything related. So why talk about cybercrime and why does it matter? Cybercrime is criminal activity that either targets or uses a computer network, or a network device. Most cybercrime is committed by cybercriminals or hackers who want to make money. However, occasionally cybercrime aims to damage computers or networks for reasons other than profit, and these could be political or personal. This one example on the screen right now is from the hacktivist or hacker group calling itself Anonymous Sudan, who recently made different threats and also attacks against organizations throughout the world, but also specifically targeting companies in the United Emirates. And different activities that pertain to cybercrime can also be viewed on the screen. You have ransomware attacks, you have claims to access to organizations through remote desktop access, you have something as simple, allegedly, as financial fraud. So this is the fraudulent check. Someone discussing or actually selling the opportunity to use a specific vulnerability to abuse companies, and someone just selling a database containing healthcare data from the UAE. Now, let's talk about some perceptions about cybercrime and cybercriminals. Even if you didn't have those, perhaps it's a logical way that you think to look at it. But essentially, if you think that there is a person out there saying, oh, here's a big bank, let's hack it, it's not necessarily how it happens. Of course, there might be someone out there who is really has his or her eyes on the target and can do this big attack. But essentially, most of the criminals or cyber criminals don't actually have the tools or the interest to attack the whole bank for the sake of whatever. So this is a perception that is not necessarily true, that threat actors think this way. They actually don't. The way to look at this and an organization from the perspective of an attacker is actually that each organization is comprised of different lucrative parts that can be used and abused by different cyber criminals. So an organization's attack surface is comprised of everything you can see here. It's employees' credentials, it's perhaps the web certificates it can issue, it has remote access servers, it has its network of information, and multiple other types of data. And so different cyber criminals can take different parts or target and attack multiple parts of this one organization or multiple organizations across the world, with one saying, for example, that they can use a certificate they stolen from a specific company to sell signed malware. So the malware will actually be signed by a legitimate organization. Another one can gain access to a remote server owned by an organization. For example, the user has used admin credentials, and that's unfortunately still common. And then even if they don't enter the company, they can resell this access for, let's say, $200 on a specific marketplace. And someone will be able to breach an organization's database, storing either usernames or documents of the company, and also use it further either to attack themselves using some sort of spam emails or resell it further. So what can be called one man's trash, so someone who actually doesn't know how to use one part of this organization's attack surface, can actually be used by others, and eventually monetization is key in the eyes of cybercriminals. Let's talk about some more truer key perceptions about cybercrime. Cybercrime is a business. For many cybercriminals, it can be a full-time employment. So we have seen ransomware gangs who operate even from physical offices and conducting business as an ordinary company, having people specialize in different parts of this actually crime. Business is booming. Kela has been looking into those people, into those threats for the past 10 years, and even more with our vast database. And this is not going anywhere. Business is booming. Cyber criminals are scaling their operations. They no longer trade, well, almost don't trade one-to-one. They set up marketplaces. They set up different ways to gain more money from whatever they steal from organizations. And using this ecosystem that has been built over the years, this financial ecosystem, which we will touch upon, attackers can buy, rent, or commission services that enable attacks. They don't have to do everything on their own, and they can use other people's expertise to launch attacks, to further attacks, and so on. But this is where we come in, where you come in, and in general, CTI practitioners come in. Knowing what these criminals are doing, monitoring them, following them, well, not as an Instagram, but knowing what they're doing can help you prevent further attack, can assist you with strengthening your protection of the company or yourself. So it is very important to know what's happening there in order for you to be able to protect your company. And where do we in Kela come in? So the cybercrime ecosystem, which I briefly mentioned, but also presented, is actually comprised of sellers and buyers as your usual financial ecosystem, just as we saw before. You can find there anything from databases of personal information to malware, to tools that can be used to breach software networks, and just your usual credit card related fraud. And those places where the actors are active is online sources. Those are closed access dedicated marketplaces and forums. Those are instant messaging groups. Those are even clear web websites and social media. And as I mentioned, this actually means that a single threat actor doesn't have to know how to conduct an attack from start to end. They just need to know where to find relevant information, for example, credentials, tools to access, initial access to organizations, and then they can use it to start an attack, further an attack, etc. It is therefore crucial to monitor an organization and its employees' exposure in those sources, so that you can make sure that any compromise discussed in them is accounted for and mitigated before it becomes an actual attack. It's also a very great database that can be used by investigators of cybercrime and threat hunters to trace the threat, add additional intelligence, etc. And our platform enables just that. We collect information from all of those underground sources, we structure it, and we provide it to our clients in an actionable way, in a way that you can use it to research and to prevent your own organization. And so that we don't leave this in the air, let's take a quick view across the platform that I just mentioned, so that you can see what it actually enables and how this can be used for yourself for protection of your company, for understanding where cyber criminals go. So our platform is essentially a comprehensive platform for CTI practitioners that enables you to look at different cybercrime threats from different perspectives. The one is actually a threat landscape, so understanding what happens around the world, which ransomware activities or network accesses were sold, where APT actors have stricken recently. So everything here is documented, can be viewed and read and researched further. Another way to look at it is the investigation platform, and this is a tool that we as Kela analysts are using frequently, daily, and this is actually what enables us to do a quick research into relevant cybercrime threats. So it can be as easy as using one of our featured queries. So obviously all of you have heard about the recent MOVEit activities, MOVEit vulnerability. So Kela has been documenting all of those attacks. So for example, you can view information about recent victim in the United States of America, Radisson hotels actually in the United States. And you can filter this information and do anything you would actually like with it. And this is without even thinking of which kind of query to conduct. Just a quick explanation of what the investigate module is just as it sounds. You launch an investigation into everything our data lake contains, our data lake that encompasses the last 15 plus years. I mentioned that we at Kela are monitoring those guys for the past 10 years, but our database spans way back into when the original cybercrime sources were launched. So if I'm interested in seeing different types of information that Kela has collected, for example, here as well, all of the ransomware victims that were claimed by different ransomware gangs. You can see here the different names. You can view the real data. So as it was posted, both in screenshots and in actual text, as it appeared, you can see it here. And again, if this is what's interesting for you now to see what are the recent ransomware victims, or you can just launch a free text research. So if we're talking about UAE, of course, I can do the search, but let's see if I find more information about the MOVEit vulnerability. And you can see here really different information coming from those cybercrime sources. So we discussed how cyber criminals can discuss vulnerabilities, what they're talking about. You can review all of those and also see different types of information, which we will also discuss on how they appear. And lastly, what you can do as well is actually monitor the exposure of your organization. So the monitor module of our platform enables you to set up keywords or assets which you want to protect. You want to understand what assets of your organizations are discussed by cyber criminals. You want to understand what emails perhaps have leaked from your organizations in different third-party breaches. You want to understand how your digital assets exposure looks like to cyber criminals. You can do all of that by setting up a list of keywords using our Kela analysts. And this is something that is working 24/7, collecting information. Each time that a new mention comes across in our sources, you will be able to detect it in this way and be able to protect your organization. So hopefully that was a quick, useful presentation. Let's go back to this part right here. And now let's see what we actually connected quickly or not so quickly to UAE. So what cybercrime sources offer that can indicate an existing or stemming threat to organizations in different countries and specifically in UAE. And what we looked at, what we want to show you today in terms of cybercrime exposure of the UAE. So first, we're looking at leaked credentials. Essentially, we call it leaked credentials, but this means emails and passwords, or sometimes without passwords, logins to different third-party platforms that were exposed in third-party breaches. So let's say a website or a database was compromised, it contained different emails and passwords. Kela processes this information and allows it to be searchable throughout our platforms. Compromised accounts, while seemingly similar to leaked credentials, those are actual logins, so usernames and passwords to different company-related resources. So once we set up a monitoring, for example, for your organization, if a user accessing those resources, those assets, was compromised, you will be able to know about it. Compromised in this case means that they were infected, or their machines, computers, laptops, even mobile phones, were infected by an info-stealing malware. So this malware is now collecting all of the credentials, all of the passwords they saved, for example, in their Google Chrome password manager, and this entire information is now at the hands of cyber criminals. Network access, we will discuss all of those in depth as well, but essentially offers to sell access to organizations by means of credentials to different remote access tools. We will also review ransomware incidents, so those that have already happened, that have been publicized, and those that involved UAE organizations. And finally, no CTI discussion can happen without the mentioning of nation states, APT groups, and we will also add hacktivist attack or hacktivist threats. So I mentioned briefly leaked credentials, but essentially what it means. Cyber criminals breach databases, collect emails from phishing campaigns, trade in those, and sometimes offer those for free. And those few examples are how this information actually looks in those different cybercrime sources that I briefly showed before across our platform and in our platform itself once we collect this information. So this is the bottom line, how Kela presents information on leaked credentials. So you will have here the email address, the domain, the password as it appeared in the source. And all those are real offers from cybercrime forums related to various UAE organizations that were breached by someone, that were hacked by someone, or in some cases, actual credentials to Microsoft products. So why leaked emails are interesting? Of course, they can be used to start brute force attacks. They can be used to send more phishing emails or malicious emails just by having this access or having the email address of this person. And since the human factor is still one of the weakest links in the cybercrime chain, many people reuse their passwords or they just change a small number, and this makes it much more easier for cyber criminals. So to assess exposure of UAE-related data, what we had to do is come to some common ground, what it means UAE credentials, and we settled for looking at the .ae top-level domain. Of course, we know that international organizations use .com, and we're not even talking about private citizens who probably use gmail.com. So what we had to look at still is at the .ae email credentials. And specifically what we saw in 2022, this is data pertaining to the entirety of 2022, over 13,000 records of leaked .ae email credentials were exposed in Kela sources. So in all the sources that I mentioned during 2022. And what can be seen here is actually the sources of those credentials, so which organizations were breached or where this information appeared. And while some of those are actually the names of the sources where we found them, you have here MGM Resorts breach, you have here Tata Telebusiness Services breach, and Slide Team breach. So all of those are services that are not UAE based. So a UAE organization was not breached to leak all this information, but it highlights the necessity to monitor for supply chain threats. So all of those people using Ministry of Education domain or the usual telecommunication company and others, they all register to this different website. Of course, we all do that but it's important to be aware of that, especially if you are, for example, Ministry of Education. You need to know where your credentials were leaked, and that some people might be compromised even further following that. And people, I mean employees meaning this could also threaten your network. Next, and I already briefly mentioned that, but essentially one of the major products of the cybercrime underground are infostealer logs. And I understand this is a bit small, but essentially logs pertain to any information obtained through this infostealing malware I previously mentioned. So the entire information from one compromised computer. So the computer itself, so the actors don't actually have access to the computer, they just have everything they kind of vacuumed off it using the infostealer malware. So in the past, and even currently, people would sell or offer this information for free. So they would just say, okay, I have the user access to this specific URL, and this is the username, this is the password, and use it as you wish. Infostealer malware is widely spread. It's using various compromised websites, mobile apps, emails, and once it's installed, it starts collecting information saved on the compromised machines. And it's not only usernames and passwords. It can be bank account information, credit card information, so everything you saved somewhere in your computer. And those are, aside from being shared for free, they're also offered for sale on automated marketplaces or downloaded as a bulk, for example, in this case from Telegram. So you have 300 pieces of information from different logs. You have the automated marketplace that you can see here, named Russian market. Nothing, well, something probably to do with Russian-speaking cyber criminals, but essentially here you can actually search, and what you see here specifically, compromised information coming from the UAE, where you can actually search for anything you like. So here we actually are talking about targeting. So someone wanting to target, wanting to access a specific organization can search for credentials to a specific resource at that organization, for example, their intranet or extranet or anything they figured out to be important, and see whether they can buy it for as little as $10. So for $10 to get a bulk of usernames, passwords, and everything this website has to offer. And this is really, really interesting because some people will only use the financial credentials, so the banking accounts, etc., but others will actually look for the more interesting ones, for the organization's Slack, for example, which we saw happen in different attacks over the years. Slack or other communication platforms, and again, different tools used by the companies. Also here, another example, just someone offering to sell access to a whole cloud of logs with information from different countries, etc. So I haven't showed it to you in the platform itself because I wanted to keep it brief, but essentially once you search for a specific domain in our platform, you will be able to see how many compromised accounts, so credentials to UAE-based websites, were offered for sale, were already stolen. That's for sure, and what you can do with it. So in the past year, so in 2020, well, actually 12 months, we identified almost 280,000 credentials to UAE-based websites that were offered for sale or shared for free. So you can see this number right here. And actually the most frequent compromised access was to Amazon, which of course can be used by cyber criminals to attack this one individual. And obviously you should be aware of your own compromise, but also different government-related websites. One of those different federal authorities for identity and citizenship, Abu Dhabi Police e-services, and others. So again, this doesn't mean that those services were breached. It just means that an individual or an employee of those organizations have been compromised by this infostealing malware, and their credentials to access this website were stolen. And what's interesting, and I would like to emphasize this once more, in the case of compromised accounts, as opposed to the credentials, it's very clear to which resources the access can be used. So they can be used to access sensitive information of organizations and further compromise in case you don't have multiple factor authentication in place. And even then, there are tools that circumvent that. So in this case, you can see, for example, also very small and not very visible, but accesses or someone who accessed the intranet of the Ministry of Education and actually was compromised. And those are several people just in June alone. Network access, I did mention this briefly, but also not very much. So we will dive into this in a second. So let me show you how it looks. So we reviewed posts from threat actors who offered various types of accesses to organizations' networks. And initial network access can assist threat actors with ransomware operations and other malicious activity, serving as a foothold from which they can move laterally throughout the compromised network. And each of those accesses can turn into millions in ransom demanded by buyers who can leverage them into ransomware attacks. However, it's important to know that ransomware attack is hardly the only outcome of such attacks. Many other malicious activities can also be performed using those types of accesses, including information theft, phishing attacks, malware distribution, etc. And what's interesting, what you can see in those images, you can see that there's no actually name, there are no names of organizations that were compromised here. And the reason is that those cybercriminals don't want to be flagged by cyber security researchers, but they provide enough information for other threat actors to understand whether this access can be lucrative for them. And you can see that the price doesn't have to be very high. So in this case, it's $500 to an access in Iraqi company dealing with oil production. And this is, as the actor describes, this is an RDP access. So what it actually means is that this actor somehow has found or came across or breached, perhaps, so all of those are options, credentials of an employee in this organization, credentials of this employee to access an RDP server of this organization. So this whole access many times will be username, password, and of course, the resource or the URL or the way to access this organization. And this can really be from as little as $500 to in bigger companies. You can see here, 1,000, 300, 500, and much more depending on the organization. And the upside, or actually the upside, yes, of the fact that those criminals are sharing all this information is that sometimes it's really just copy pasted from specific websites that provide marketing leads or sales leads, such as ZoomInfo. And it means that we as researchers, or you yourself as a researcher, can actually go into those websites and search for the relevant information. So let's say really verbatim, general trade and transport oil production, 8 million Iraq, you might have a list of 2-3 candidates for the actual victim. And of course, this is just the beginning. You might need to actually discuss this information with the threat actor. So ask for more information, ask for proof. Sometimes this is what we do for our clients, or for if we suspect that the victim is our client. And sometimes within the proof information, which is many times a screenshot, the information will not be redacted, or the information will be enough to understand, okay, this is really this company, and this is the type of access. So this is really a very interesting avenue of investigation. And you can see here, already familiar to you from my presentation of the platform, this is our documentation of different threat actors selling accesses. You can see here, as I mentioned, it's not us redacting the information. This is how the actors are selling it. So a Spain-based company, Netherlands-based company, Maldives, Thailand, Pakistan, and so on. So this type of threat encompasses the entire world and definitely is worth looking at. And if we're talking, I briefly mentioned the relationship to ransomware. So really, in some cases, we're able to connect a previously sold network access with a later claimed ransomware access. Of course, without having access to actual company logs or actual information from within the company, we cannot know for 100% that this is really what happened. But those coincidences are just too much, and we know that this happens. So for example, in this case, we have a Dominican Republic company that was claimed as victim of the Medusa ransomware, one of those million ransomware strains out there. But a month before that, which actually corresponds to the amount of time that passes per our observations between a network access being sold and a ransomware attack. So just 1 month, access to this company was offered for sale by a threat actor named Darkwolf, and this is an insight by our intelligence analysts that can be found on the platform itself exclusively. So if we're talking about what actually happened in UAE from the perspective of this threat, you can see here one example, just recent example, someone selling access to UAE-based municipality. Again, with the information that was provided, we were able to suggest that this is the Dubai municipality, based on the information they presented. And actually, across 2022, we observed 25 network accesses for UAE-based entities. And it's important to note that this is only publicly offered accesses. We know that threat actors are also trading within themselves. So from the publicly claimed network, or essentially sold network accesses, more than 25 were offered for sale for UAE-based organizations. The highest number of those accesses were to companies from the professional services and engineering and construction companies, accounting for over 36%. So those two sectors were the top organizations to which access was offered. But from our observations, our research on this whole trend or threat, we know that organizations across the entire world and across all of the sectors are usually targeted, because eventually threat actors need to make money, and if they gain access to organization, it doesn't really matter to them what this organization is, and it's very much opportunistic. The next one, and I think one of the attacks or one of the threats that has been out there for a long time, is ransomware threats. It's been evolving for the last several years in terms of public awareness, because ransomware attacks have existed for the past 20-30 years, since you have networks and internet and computers. But what has changed across or over the last several years is the fact that people operating ransomware strains started publicly shaming organizations and publicly publishing the fact that they attacked an organization in order to gain more money. So if an organization refuses to pay, well, essentially ransomware is to pay ransom for the effects of a malware. And if an organization refuses to pay ransomware in the beginning, their name gets published on each of those, sometimes pretty, sometimes not, websites or blogs, as we call them. And those companies get an ultimatum that their files will be published, what's referred to as double extortion tactic. And many times those files do get published, and anyone can see the organization's financial statements, their client information, even sensitive items as passports and everything else. And ransomware attacks have become a prevalent threat in the current cybersecurity landscape. The number of ransomware attacks has significantly increased, causing financial losses, data breaches, and disruption to critical operations. As much as, for example, the Colonial Pipeline attack in the United States. I think it's been already 3 years since then, 2 or 3 years, essentially blocking or stopping the oil distribution. So something that's really a threat to be reckoned with, so to say. And as you have seen, Kela has access and visibility into multiple websites of those threat actors. We constantly follow them and see if new ones emerge. So we have pretty great coverage of victims and claims of those different actors. And of course, we research it once we can. And while opportunistic, what's important to remember about those attacks is, while opportunistic, these types of attacks often originate from initial accesses, as I just mentioned in the network accesses thread. So those accesses can be also gained from phishing, exploiting vulnerabilities, and sold by brokers, initial access brokers. This is the name of the actors that we use for people who sell this access. And again, eventually it can come to this type of attack, ransomware attack, which is again just one type of information or just one type, sorry, of attacks that can happen. And if we're looking at ransomware events involving UAE companies, we observed in general across 2022 almost, well, not almost, but over 2,700 publicly claimed ransomware victims. Again, it's important to remember that those are the publicly claimed ones. There are smaller attacks on even individuals if someone has downloaded their own file, or small organizations who pay ransom without publishing it. Small organizations or every size of organization that don't pay ransomware, but the ransomware they were attacked with does not operate this kind of activity. So with all that in mind, still almost 3,000 victims, published victims, is a lot. However, only 14 of those were directed at UAE organizations. So this is kind of good news, but still something to reckon with, because only in 2023, so now we're only half year into it, already we observed 13 victims from the UAE in the different sectors across UAE. So 14 entire of 2022 and 13 only half of 2023. So this is definitely looks like a threat on the rise in UAE. Again, with keeping in mind that many attacks are opportunistic and aim to gain money. So threat actors from the ransomware sector, let's say, have very clear instructions on who to attack and who not to attack. And clearly they're targeting wealthy companies or wealthy countries more than others because they know they can get the money. So the attack eventually is for the money, and who will have the money? More rich companies and countries. But still, you can still fall a victim to this attack if you're not careful enough. And to actually not summarize, but come to the, as I mentioned, the most notorious cyber attacks, or something that you can't have CTI without, is nation state level attacks or APT attack groups. And this term refers to coordinated cyber activities of sophisticated criminals and nation state entities. They often target large organizations, governments, foreign governments, to steal information for espionage, for influence campaigns. And as APTs are considered to be state-sponsored, their motivations are typically political or economic, according to the state's interests. However, despite the general perception that those are complicated groups and their methods of operations are very robust and complicated, some of the components of their tools or their tooling don't have to be as complicated or as novel or unique as you might think. And those two screenshots that you can see here is from our recent research into the presence of APT groups in cybercrime sources and cybercrime ecosystem. And we definitely saw tools that were attributed as used by different APT organizations offered for sale on different cybercrime forums. So even those sophisticated APT or considered to be sophisticated APT actors don't have to invent the wheel each time over and over again. They can go to this marketplace, they can purchase credentials to start an attack or a specific targeted attack against an organization. Maybe they have an investigative platform of their own. They can buy this rat tool from someone, also to kind of obfuscate attribution, because if it's available to anyone, you can't really pin it down to just one person. So it's important to remember that while those attacks, yes, they are robust, they are big, they can also be traced to cybercrime sources. And the reason it's important is because if you have visibility into this information, if you have visibility into what criminals and what threat actors are doing and using, you can protect yourself, you can enable specific protection tooling, you can understand what's happening, and so you can protect yourself even from those types of attacks, especially if you know what your attack surface looks like and what those actors are using. So if we're talking about some events that happened throughout 2022, 2023, campaigns attributed to different APT groups involving UAE organizations, we have several of those. So starting from January 2022, North Korean phishing campaigns targeting cryptocurrency startups. So North Korea groups are actually notorious for their financial gain abuse. So not necessarily political influence, nothing. They're like, if you probably heard about the Lazarus group. Mainly it looks like they are just looking to bring some money into the country's fund. So that's why targeting cryptocurrency startups, banks, and others. So in this case, several cryptocurrency startups in multiple countries, including the UAE, were targeted by phishing campaigns attributed to Blue North from North Korea. In March 2022, and actually there were several campaigns originating or attributed to Iranian attributed organizations. Exploitation of actually a notable vulnerability, proxy shell, that was also discussed widely in different CTI communities. So APT35 exploited proxy shell vulnerabilities in organizations in several countries, including UAE. Again, knowing what your attack surface looks like and that someone is targeting them is very important. Another Iranian campaign targeting several Middle East countries and Caucasian countries with spear phishing campaign intending for further compromise and infection. In November 2022, a claim of a cooperation between Chinese and Russian-speaking threat actors or Russia-originated actors exploiting a remote code execution in a specific Windows Internet Key Exchange protocol in organizations in multiple countries, including UAE. So many of those, again, are targeting several countries, but it's still important to understand who is targeting you and why. And finally, one of the items that I highlighted in the beginning of the session is hacktivist organizations. So usually those are protesting something that seems unethical, something that seems related to geopolitical. So over the course of the war, the Russia-Ukraine war, essentially a lot of those hacktivist groups have emerged, mostly oriented, well, not mostly, but both Russia and Ukraine oriented. The Russian ones more destructive towards Western organizations, towards anyone not agreeing with Russia, any organization or country exposing, promoting support for Ukraine. And those attacks, essentially what they do is many times denial of service attacks or distributed denial of service attacks. And they claim their targets and victims over Telegram channels. And Telegram has seen a huge rise in the existence of such groups in this platform. And if we go back to definition of cybercrime, many of you have heard the term, perhaps dark web over the years. Well, Telegram is a big source of cybercrime activity, and you cannot say it's actually a dark web source. So definitely organizations should be aware of the type of threats that emerge from there. Unfortunately, over 2023, specifically this Anonymous Sudan group and other groups have claimed that they will target UAE organizations. So not necessarily in relation to the Russia-Ukraine war, but since they also claimed those attacks, I connected it. And in this case, it's just because it appears, or not appears, we know that this happened. We're talking to you guys. So cooperation, cyber threat intelligence or cyber prevention, cyber attack prevention cooperation between Israel and UAE, essentially causing this team, Anonymous Sudan, to claim that they will attack UAE organizations, and they have shared screenshots showing proof of the fact that they actually taken down 1 or 2 websites in the UAE, in Israel, etc. So after this whole long discussion, what now and how CTI can help? So essentially, CTI practitioners, defenders should be aware of the threats and threat landscape stemming from the cybercrime underground. And hopefully what you have seen today is helping with that, helping to understand what's out there, what you should do about it. And this, of course, is a larger discussion of what you should do about it. But now that you know what happens, you can tailor your prevention activities and everything you do to thwart those types of attacks. So this can help you prevent attacks. Keeping in mind that ransomware that I so frequently mentioned is just the end game. You should think, what are the ways into your organization, that is credentials, that is the network access that we discussed, the vulnerabilities discussed by threat actors. All those can serve as a start, and knowing what cybercriminals talk about, knowing what your attack surface already looks like, so what is already exposed, first of all, taking care of that, and then frequently or conducting ongoing monitoring to make sure that any kind of compromise, any kind of exposure is mitigated is very important. In CTI, of course, the words TTP, MITRE attack, etc., are very robust, very important. Knowing or actually seeing and researching those threat actors' activities can actually help you understanding their TTPs. So you will see discussions about which ransomwares are currently starting to exploit, for example, Linux-based systems. So this is something that a couple of years ago did not happen, and people were kind of organizations using Linux-based servers and systems were kind of happy that it can't be a target of ransomware, but not anymore. So all of the information residing in those sources and actually being constantly discussed can help you understand what are the current TTPs and how you can prevent or protect yourself against it. And of course, one of the also talked about issues is third-party risk. You can use all of the above to understand, has your vendor already suffered a data breach? What are kind of discussions if you're using software vendors? Is anybody talking about vulnerabilities in that software that you're using? And all of those different types of discussions as well. So those are only 3 major points in how all of this is supporting CTI efforts and how can it help you to protect your organization. Okay, I've talked a lot, and thank you for listening, and hopefully it was useful. And we can perhaps have some time for questions. Great question. What are the key skills and expertise required for organizations to build a successful CTI team in the UAE? So I think, first of all, it's not necessarily related to the UAE, but definitely if this is a new focus of the country, then definitely it's relevant. So most importantly, try to think what are the tools that you will need to be able to cover different types of threats. And I definitely know that CTI practitioners suffer from alert fatigue. So using all of those different tools can also lead to too much alerts, not knowing what to do. But you can definitely understand what types of information, what types of threats you want to prevent, and what tools can help you with that. In terms of skills and expertise, really educate yourself about the current trends, and definitely, well, it's kind of a question to my doorstep, knowing or learning about cybercrime and understanding what threats coming from cybercrime ecosystem is also very important. But essentially, there is a big like a myriad of answers to this question, but essentially the focus should be relevant tools and relevant expertise, or perhaps cooperation with different organizations that can help you in building this practice. Okay, any more questions? Yeah, let's see it now. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Are there any legal or regulatory considerations that organizations in the UAE should be aware of when implementing CTI solutions? So perhaps the SAT team can also help answer this question. In general, we know that in different countries, there are different restraints in terms of how information can be obtained and what kind of actions can be performed. As an example, the compromised accounts that I mentioned, so credentials that someone is selling, sometimes we don't know, well, most of the times when it comes to automated markets and someone first demanding money and only then you get the credentials, we need to acquire this information in order to understand who was exposed. We have clients in different countries. Some of them, their regulatory considerations allow for this kind of information to be obtained because it is obtained for the protection of the company, and this is a regulatory consideration in the country. Others will consider this kind of negotiating with terrorists, so they would not like to use this information to purchase this information essentially. And in other places, it's overall considered considered bad. So we are not aware of specific UAE restraints just because we're not actively looking into that in the UAE, but definitely those should be reviewed, kind of regulations on what kind of cyber-related activities can be performed by cybersecurity practitioners and defenders of organizations, most importantly. So I would say that this is something that has to be considered, again, in terms of collecting information and collecting further context. So just making sure that none of that puts your company in jeopardy. Can we do a real-time investigation with threat landscape? If you mean the specific module in Kela's platform, then definitely. Each of the items appearing in threat landscape are connected to a real-time recorded event, or for example, ransomware attack. You're able to proceed from that one notion of a company was attacked to within the investigate module where you can see the actual posts. You can research any kind of information that appears there. For example, who are those ransomware attackers? What are they claiming to have done? Is there any further information about this company's compromise, and so on. Okay. How can small and medium-sized enterprises in the UAE benefit from adopting CTI practices? So that's a good question. I know I mentioned that many of the attacks are opportunistic, that big companies or kind of wealthy organizations can be hit, but unfortunately, anyone can get hit. And it's very important, especially in the case of small and medium-sized companies, to be aware of your attack landscape. Unfortunately, those companies can become a vector of an attack against a bigger organization through third-party compromise. So we have seen this a lot. A company that is very small, providing a very specific tooling to very specific organizations. Because it was small, they didn't implement CTI practices, or they didn't have necessary protection like security practices in place. And the compromise of their employees were actually have actually led to a compromise of their clients, and the information was actually sourced from them because of that compromise. So definitely both CTF practices and security practices should be implemented in companies regardless of their size, if they're providing service, of course. If you're not, if you're just working for yourself, doing your own work, you're not able to kind of pose a threat to anyone. But still, you should know that your employees are registering to third-party websites. Those websites are being breached, and it's very important to know that you cannot be breached because you have the relevant CTI practices in place. And another question, also wanted to know whether the tool has any notification or alert system to prevent an organization from future attacks. So this is a great question. So the monitor tool can actually send notifications each time a new type of incident is detected by the system. So for example, Kelly ingested a new data breach source, or emails belonging to organization have appeared in some Telegram chat that we monitor. Once this appears within the monitor, so once it's ingested by the system, again, everything is done automatically. You can set up an alert that you will receive via email, so you can actually action it within the same day and make sure you have mitigated the threat. Okay. So I think that's all from us today. Susan, any last words?
Thank you so much. We would also like to thank everyone for attending, and we hope they've learned and enjoyed this webinar. And of course, a big thank you to Irina and Kayla team. Thank you for the great presentation. We really enjoyed it. And we would love to hear from you. If you have any questions or comments or any feedback, please do let us know. And thank you again for attending, and please take care and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you. Bye-bye.